Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. This is the second part of the series on the Voigtlander Vitessa L 1950s rangefinder. I've already covered the camera in detail in part 1, so if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. But for this part, we're going to go out and shoot some photos with it. So let's get into it. This afternoon, I'm out here with the Voigtlander Vitessa 35mm rangefinder. It's a good walking around camera, I think. I think it'll prove to be a good walking around camera because it's not interchangeable lenses, so I'm not going to be fiddling around with that. It's got a 50mm 2.8 lens, so I'm just sort of walking around downtown Carrollton to see what I can find. All right, so the first shot I have here is down these railroad tracks. So I don't know that you probably can't see it from here. Tracks go around in the circle. We've got some train cars in the back. And I'm going to try to avoid as much sky as possible because it's an overcast day, which I like for this, but I don't want any of that sky in there because that's just going to be blown out like a bald sky, as they say. So I am going to meter using my trusty Minolta spotmeter F, and just for kicks, I'm going to set it in EV mode instead of f-stop mode. So basically it's going to tell me an EV, an exposure value. For example, what I just measured has an EV, an exposure value of 12.9. All right. So the thing with this camera is that you can set the exposure value on the lens and it will link the shutter speed and the f-stop together. So then and it will lock them together. So if you change one, the other automatically changes with it. So it's kind of a cool system. Don't do that anymore. I had a Hasselblad one time that had that on the lens. Never really used it, but I'm going to use it this time. Also, this camera has a meter built in. So it reads from the front here, and it is based on the light value scale or the EV, the exposure value scale. Let's set up and take some shots. All right, so I'm going to take a few spot meter readings, and what I'll do, I'll try to find the highlight and the shadow point and average those two together. So the dark area here on the inside of the railroad tracks is at an EV of an 11. There is a white warehouse in the back that is EV 13.6. Like I said, I'm not going to take the sky into account here because that is EV 15 and that is significantly brighter than the rest of this. So the darkest area we're looking at is 10.5, so EV 10.5. The ballast, the gravel, is at an EV of 13. There is a light gray box car in the background at EV 12.9. And like I said, that brightest area here, which is a white painted warehouse, is 13.6. So I'm going to set that as my highlight point, and the shadow area here on the inside of the rail, that is going to be my shadow point. And when I average those together, I get an EV of 12.2. Just going to open the lens and set. I'm just going to set it to 12. All right. So that is looking at a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second at f5.6. So let's go with that. The one thing about this I have noticed already is that this gets in the way of my cap. Right. Make sure my finger is not in front of the lens like I did with the last rangefinders. So at 5.6, let's see, where do I want to focus? Let's focus about a quarter of the way in, or a third of the way in. All right, one shot down, pressing down to advance. You would think that that would take a lot of effort to press that down to advance the film, but it actually does not. All right, let's do this again. Let's focus in a slightly different spot. Let's do a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, and that's going to move our f-stop to f8. So there's really no bracketing on this. because to bracket this, that means you're going to change either the f-stop or the shutter speed, not both. And the way these are linked together, if you want to bracket an exposure, you're going to have to ignore the EV. You're going to have to reset it. So if you wanted to bracket it to a stop over, then you're going to have to just reset the EV. Where was I? All right, F8. F8 at 60. Still focusing in about the same spot up here. All right. Very good. All right, so before we move on, I'm gonna pack this up, put it in the bag. Usually I have a big backpack, you know, and with this camera, just put it in a little bag. Good. All right, let's find something else. I'm thinking that way. There's a bridge. But before I move on from this location, this is the old depot in downtown Carrollton. And they've got it done up nice as an event center, and it's nice and it's updated, it's restored, it's renovated. But I'm thinking that there's probably some architectural detail in these braces here on the roof, maybe right from the corner. Anyway, I'm gonna check it and see, be worth a shot. Let's see what the exposure will be though, because that's gonna be darker. And I've got 100 speed film, so that may determine it. Well, let's check it though. So my minimum EV for that, so the darkest areas are at an EV of 8, and the brightest areas, 12.4. So let's measure that, put that in memory. All right, so 8.2 is my shadow area, put that in memory. My highlight area, it's gonna be this gray concrete border here. Average that, that's gonna give me an EV of 10, which is gonna give me an f-stop of about f2.8. So let's drop the shutter speed to 1/60th of a second at f4. And the EV is 10. All right, so that is set. And at 1/60th of a second, it's just pointing at f4, so that's right. Let's see, what does the built-in meter tell me? It's telling me f13, so it may be being influenced by the sky. Again, make sure I'm focused properly. I don't know how much flare I've got coming in through the lens because I'm not seeing what's coming into the lens because it's a rangefinder. Let's see, let's do one. I'm gonna be brave and shoot one at 1/30th of a second at 5.6. So with that 1/30th of a second exposure, normally wouldn't want to do that handheld, but since this is a rangefinder and I don't have a mirror that flips up out of the way to cause vibration, if my form was correct and I held my breath and I was really easy on the shutter release, that should be okay. We will see. Let me make sure there's nothing else here before I move on. Yeah, there actually is. So that last one I tried to use some symmetry. This time I'm going to set it off balance just a bit. My exposure value should not have changed at all in this. All right, but I am using 1/30th of a second at f5.6. All right, so let's make sure I don't vibrate the camera too much. And again, just for good measure. Now let's move on to something else. All right, so here we go with the, so there's a bridge in the background, tracks running up to it, and also we've got this little section of warehouses and a road splitting off that way. So that's probably going to be the center of the shot, and the tracks are just going to lead us back there into the background. Let's see. Let's meter first before I get any of this other stuff figured out. All right, so the track ballast, the gravel is EV14. The light blue container truck in the back is 14.5, 13.4, 12. All right, so for my shadow point, I'm gonna make it the door on that building back there, and that is going to give me EV 12.2. Put that in memory. And the lightest portion is the sky, but I don't really want to base it on the sky. So I'm gonna put it on the next brightest down, which is probably gonna be this concrete patio here at EV 14. And that averages out to an EV 13. Not a very wide contrast range here because it's overcast and nice and even. So usually I don't care that much for overcast, but today I'm fine with it. So that gives me an exposure of 1/125th of a second at f8. And let's do one at 1/60th of a second at f11. Because I do want a deep depth of field here. All right, let's find something else. All right, so for this, I mean, it's just a bench. Nothing special about the bench. But gonna have it off center. We got some nice light coming from the open sky here. Overcast, of course, like I said before. And then we've got the brick wall that sort of curves around into the background. So I think this will be worth a shot. So let us meter. Very narrow contrast range out here. So I've got a highlight there that's 12.6 EV. The shadow leg of the bench underneath is 9 EV. The highlight of the bench is 12 EV. The concrete sidewalk is 12.6. All right, so we are going to say that the sidewalk is the highlight, 12.6 EV. The shadow area underneath the bench is my shadow at 9 EV. And it comes down to 11 EV, which gives me a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second at 5.6. So we'll do one at 1/60th of a second at 5.6. I'm gonna back up just a little bit, make sure I get all of the bench in there. Very good. Let's go wide open. So that's 1/250th of a second at 2.8. And then let's go for 1/30th of a second at f8. Moving on. So one thing I like about this shot is that it's in a raised bed and I'm lower, and therefore if I want to get a bug's eye view of these flowers, I don't have to lay down on my stomach to do that. What would be good for a shallow depth of field, or the reason why a shallow depth of field is great, because it's a parking lot in the back. So I want to blur that out as much as possible. Let's just see what this thing will do. Wide open at 2.8. So let's meter. Let's see, the white petals of the flower, I'm sorry, are EV 13.5. The shadow areas at the base are 10. The pine straw is 10.3. So 10.3 is really the shadow area, and it's not really much of a shadow area. And like I said, the white petals of the flowers are EV 13 here and EV 12.9 there. So EV 13 basically. 10.6. It's not a very wide dynamic range. Didn't think it would be. I don't want the petals of the flower to be the brightest thing though. So what can I find in the background that's a little bit brighter? In this case, I may want to include the sky, just to give it a more realistic highlight point. So the sky in the back is EV 14.5. The petal on this flower is EV 13.5. All right, so it gives me an EV of 12.4. Now to get an f-stop of f2.8, I'm gonna need to set the shutter speed to 1/500th of a second. All right, I'm gonna get as close as I possibly can too. Can't really get super close to it to exaggerate the depth of field. This is about as close as I can get. Actually right here, and that is at a little less than, well, it's about 3 feet. So here we have a sculpture of a wolf. It says UWG on the side because that's the University of West Georgia, and the mascots are wolves. There are a lot of these wolf sculptures around town, all painted differently, all sponsored by different businesses, different individuals. A lot of cities do this to raise money for their nonprofits or various causes. So you notice that the front 2 feet, or the front 2 legs, have casts on them, and so does the one of the back legs. That's because when these were new, which was about 10 years ago, of course, there's gonna be vandalism, right? So somebody wanted to take the wolf, and they tried to take it, and they broke the feet. But the wolf was recovered, and one of the orthopedic surgeons groups in town decided that they could fix that by putting a cast on the sculpture. So that's an interesting way to come together to fix something that somebody thought was worthy of vandalism. In any case, gonna get a shot of this. I just thought you might want a little context. This is one of those times where color film would be great, but we're just gonna go with this because, all right, so the camera's meter is looking like EV 13. Of course, I'm gonna test this with the spot meter. All right, so the concrete pad underneath is an EV of 13.6. That's a bright area. The dead grass is 12.8. The darker areas on the dark blue areas on the sculpture itself, 11.8. What about the shadow area in the shrubs behind us? That's what we're gonna look for. So that is 9.2. All right, so highlight point is 14. Put that in memory. Shadow in the back, 9.5. Put that in memory. And that gives us an EV of 11.5. Okay, which in turn translates into a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second at f4.5. Got one of Carrollton's local boutiques. We've got a lot of rabbits in the window. and it's a reflection. It's an opportunity to get a self-portrait of the photographer. And then we've got the shrub with a bow over on this side. So I'm going to use that sort of as a compositional element, just sort of straight on, flat. And that's going to be fine at this distance. Okay. In search of the light. All right, so there is a white rabbit in the window at EV13. All right, so that's my highlight for sure. And my shadow area is gonna be there, 9.8. Memory. Exposure value of 11.5. So let's focus on the shrub in the front for this one. And then I'll focus on the rabbits in the window. I'm gonna slide over so that I don't get any of the shrub in there. But like I said before, it's a perfect opportunity for a self-portrait. Try to focus as accurately as possible. All right. So before I totally move away from this spot, I want to get this same thing at an angle. I'm gonna have to back up a little bit. So we can get the door, the concrete, some of the wall. I don't have to check the meter, nothing's changed. I do want a little bit more depth of field. So we'll go one at 1/60th of a second, then we'll go one at 1/30th of a second. So here's another bit of urban decay. So we've got this brick wall that had that stucco on it at some point, concrete. Very non-linear and non-level, so it's possibly, there's some very weird brick in here. But then we're contrasted by this wooden frame where we have very sharp, plumb and level shapes. So half the photo is going to be this chaos looking thing here, and half of it's going to be some something that's a little more refined. Subject of contrasts, if nothing else. So the darkest part of the wood there is EV 10.2. 13.4 is a highlight. Is it the highlight? I believe so. All right, so 13.4 is my highlight. Let's go with the shadow area of the wood as the shadow. An EV of 12, which equates to 1/120th of a second at 5.6, so EV 12. So it's a little bit more light here than there was on the wall behind me, the last shot, but not much. Let's go 1/60th of a second at f8. Probably have to back up again. I'm gonna go vertical again. But I'm gonna focus horizontally because it's just easier to do that. Getting a little bit closer. Let's go with a little shallower depth of field. So let's go to 1/250th of a second at f4. Focusing sort of on the brick. Don't want that car in the background though.
All right, for my last shot today, I like this angle. We've got the electric meters in the back. We've got a diagonal staircase coming down. We've got a lot of strong verticals. We've got some curve around the bottom here with these conduits. It's just got a lot of lines. So let's see if I can get something real plumb and level. Got a highlight point on the white stucco here of 14.3 EV, and I've got a nice shadow rusty spot in between the electric meters at 10.2 EV. There's a shadow spot under the stairs at 9.7. All right, so let's go 9.7 as my shadow, and the white stucco as the highlight. Gives me an EV of 12. Which gives me 1/125th of a second at f5.6. I want a little bit more depth of field because I want it all to be in focus. So 1/60th of a second at f8. EV12. Final shot. Let's go 1/30th of a second at f11. All right, let's go home, see what we got.
Well, I rather like this camera. As I mentioned in part 1, it's made incredibly well. The fit and finish are excellent and it feels very upscale. I expected the advanced mechanism to be a bit clunky, but it was smooth and required very little physical effort. And I have no complaints about the lens either. The only thing I ran into was forgetting that I was using a rangefinder and not an SLR, and needing to give myself a little extra room for parallax error when shooting up close. And just generally being aware that what I was seeing through the viewfinder wasn't exactly what the lens was seeing. But this is the case with any rangefinder, really. So I can't fault the Vitessa for that, just me. So what's your take on the Vitessa? As always, I'd love to hear your comments, so be sure to chime in. If you enjoyed this photo shoot, be sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing so you won't miss any of the good stuff I'll have coming up. And I want to express my thanks to Richie for lending me this camera for the review. Now I'll have to put one on my wish list. I'll see you next time.